Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Well, not just an ATP Geopolitics video. I think if all the stars are aligned and the winds are blowing in the right direction, my guest Greg Terry might be co-streaming this as well on his channel. But welcome to whomever is watching. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to be talking the Ukraine war, obviously, tonight. I am super excited to speak to Greg Terry because just in the kind of green room of chatting to him, there's already like a million things that we've had to say. So this conversation should be a relatively easy conversation in terms of there's going to be plenty to talk about. But I'm really super excited to find out more about Greg because sounds like a super interesting guy in terms of his background and the connections to Ukraine. So first of all, Greg, thanks for agreeing to come on.
Jonathan, thank you for the invitation. It was through one of your subscribers that's faithful watching and been watching my updates here in the States. That's how the connection was made. So thank you for taking a risk on it. And I think it's going to turn out good. And I can tell you tonight, we're co-streaming, buddy. She's rolling. Everything's
nice.
So good.
That's really cool. Well, that's fantastic. Well, yeah, so that's really good news. Would you like to introduce yourself to my viewers and to me? Really, you know, we don't know you. You're a fellow YouTuber, YouTubing at the Greg Terry Experience, and we'll sort of throw out links and whatnot as we go. But
sure.
But give us your background. Where have you come from? How are you connected to this Ukraine war? How are you connected to Ukraine?
So I'm based here in Greenville, Pennsylvania. I'm just north of Pittsburgh. I'm an American. Born in 72, I'm 51, and in 1994, I traveled to Moscow by myself. I was actually teaching a month-long class there, and that's how I was exposed. And to be quite honest, I always had a draw to the Soviet Union, not to support the Soviet Union, but to learn about it. And growing up during the 80s, Ronald Reagan, the wall falling, all of that. Next thing I know, I find myself in Russia in 1994, invited by a friend who now I continue to work with. He's a television guy, and it's been a really, really good connection there. So that's 94. At that point, I started to learn the Russian language. And in 1998, I started traveling to Ukraine. The first place I ever went in Ukraine was the town of Slavuta, which was just hit about a month ago, and it was pretty interesting what happened there. From that, I've been traveling in and out of Ukraine for the last 26 years. I speak fluent Russian. I'm working on the Ukrainian. I have tons of what I consider friends and family. I've spent over 3 years of my life inside Ukraine. I was on Maidan when Maidan unfolded in November, December 2013, January, February 2014, where the Russian snipers, absolutely Russian snipers, were in the Hotel Ukraine there at Maidan. I was in Donetsk 2016, right before it fell. In fact, I was one of the last flights coming into the Donetsk airport, which was a beautiful thing, now completely destroyed. And from that, everything's been complete commitment to Ukraine, because we're standing for truth. We're standing for right. We're standing for the world's really confused on this one and lost. Ukrainians are not Nazis. The dictator is in the Kremlin in Moscow, and we're doing our best to tell the truth. So from that, many relationships built, and I find myself now doing what you do, and you do an amazing job. I love watching your stuff, Jonathan, and trying to share the truth. But for me, I also go into Ukraine. 5 months I've spent on the front lines. We have personal friends in the Azov. Yes, the guys that were in Mariupol at the Azovstal. We have friends in Wolverines. We have friends in Wolfpack. All of these different brigades that we work with personally. My partner there on the ground. We have a nonprofit there called Napriam, and okie dokie. You heard of Kind House Ukraine? My cousin runs USA branch, 100% nonprofit. I have not, but you ring something. There's a house for similar to Kind House in Washington, D.C. there, with attached to the embassy. But So my wife, I have a wife, I have 3 kids, and the next thing I know, I have a compelling desire to support my friends and what I consider to be family there in Ukraine. And we've been raising aid through our YouTube channel, through our nonprofit here in the United States. We've raised about $250,000 in
Holy
aid, shipping it
macaroni.
there, personally delivering it. And one of the big draws that people like to give through our organization to get to Ukraine is I hand deliver it. I hand deliver it to the soldiers at the front, tourniquets, thermals, gloves, drone equipment, whatever, power banks. And we're just here to tell the truth. About 30 days from now, I'll be heading back to Ukraine. I'll do another 3-month tour. And we basically, based in Khmelnytsky, west central Ukraine, and we basically run a line nonstop. We go to Kyiv. So yeah, there's your map. We're based over to your left, Khmelnytsky, one there, right there. We then run to Kyiv. We then run up to Chernihiv, Sumy. Yeah. We then come down to Kharkiv. We go over to Kupiansk. We come down to Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. We support the Bakhmut field hospitals. Then our guys straight down. The next would be Avdiivka. The real trouble right now. Below that's Marinka. If then you then come around, you'll see where the orange marker is at Veliki Novosilica. We work in there, and then coming down into Robitny below Oleshki, we work there. We have a brigade we work with in Oleshki, and then of course we wrap up to Zaporizhia. Sorry for the Russian, and then we come down through Nikopol. We run the river. We end up in Kherson, supporting Kherson, and back to Khmelnytsky. We rest 3 days and we loop it again. They're 10-day turns, and we'll do 8 of them when I'm there. But my team there, they do it nonstop. So sorry for the extension, but that's what we do, Jonathan. And it's just an honor to be here with you. So thank you.
It's insanely impressive and yeah, incredible. And I expect you have just already a host of experiences that you have that you've gone through, you know, to get a really incredible taste of the conflict. And you know, so much. Where do we start? I guess. How do you? Well, the first thing when we were speaking earlier, I was saying to you that, you know, you look at, say, Israel Palestine, and it's such a hot mess of a conflict. You can't really clearly work out who the good guys and the bad guys are at any one point in time. That can kind of flip and change, and there's elements that, yeah, I don't agree with that and don't agree with that, but I do agree and I do agree. So it's just really confusing. Whereas this, to me, is one of the most. It's one of the clearest conflicts I've ever known. And I know that sounds overly simplistic, and many people go, oh, life isn't like that. But really, for me, it is in this case, where you've got an invading dictatorial regime that's trying to take over a sovereign nation, trying to genocidally expunge it from the face of the earth in terms of language and identity and culture. And so for me, it's really simple. Is that how you see it as well? I don't want to lead you on with a question.
You're not leading me on, and I do need to give a shout out to King Raccoon. He's the gentleman, my friend, that connected us. Thank you, King. Nice to see you, buddy.
Legend.
So, Jonathan, this is cut and dry. This is cut and dry. This has been in preparation, and when I say this, I'm referring to the war in Ukraine. This has been in preparation for 2 decades. For 2 decades, Vladimir Putin has been preparing for a movement that he considers would mark his legacy. And that is to make a mark in the history of the world of his greatness, of the Soviet regime, of the old way of thinking. And that's the truth, guys. He wants to create a legacy for himself. I watch a lot of Russian media. I can understand it. And some of the things that he does, I share on my streams. I'll translate it, voice it over. It is Hitler 2. It is exactly what it is. It's Hitler the second. And so with that said, this is cut and dry. Russia stole Crimea through a relationship with the corrupt president of Ukraine at that time. That is not Zelensky. Zelensky is not corrupt. Zelensky does not have billions of dollars in the Canary Islands. That's all Russian propaganda. But during the 2013, 2014, Crimea was sold, basically. Naval rights were given to Russia for 25 million. Step one. Then you have the separatists breaking away in the East. These were all fundamental plans of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin strategists. After that, we come all the way to 2022, which is not the beginning of the war. The war began 10 years ago and was prepared for 20 years ago. So at that point, here we come. We're coming at Kyiv. We're bringing the tanks across the border. In fact, I was live streaming with my my partner there, Yevgen Matsutsa. I need to get him on with you sometime. Speaks perfect English. Amazing. From right inside Ukraine. Oh, yeah, we'll do that. But we were live streaming, and that night we were talking about the 150,000 troops amassed on the border. And at the very moment we were streaming, he goes, Greg, we were just hit by a missile. The moment it began, we were live streaming it, and by sheer accident. And from that day, we're committed for victory until the end. We're still working together, but this is cut and dry. I've been there. I've had rockets dropped on me. I've been blown out of my bed in where we stay by Iskanders and walked down, and there's 9 people laying there killed from a Russian rocket in a village, and it would be a grandma and 5 little kids and a market guy. I've been in the schools that are destroyed, that were absolutely targeted. The last building hit actually in Kyiv just a couple of days ago with Shaheeds was a kindergarten, completely destroyed.
Yeah.
And, the Ukrainian military, if you saw that video, Jonathan, they actually came and they apologized for not being able to defend it. It's just a view into the Ukrainian culture. So this is good versus evil. This is black and white. And I believe the world's sleeping on it.
Yeah, and that's so. We'll come to that in a second. What just flashed up was Putin's 2021 essay that he published. That was where he talked a lot about the identity of Ukraine and this kind of history, this revisionist history almost. That's probably something I'm going to dip into in an extra video of mine at some point. But if you have any doubt about what Russia thinks, what Putin thinks, and you only need to look at the stuff that Putin has said and the stuff that he's written. You only need to listen to state TV and the propagandists on TV to listen to the outright despicable genocidal rhetoric that's coming out that's been coming out for a year and a half now, and it hasn't particularly changed in terms of the sorts of things they are saying, and it is truly disturbing. Some of those things you've heard talk about the justification of burning and drowning children, literally. Can I get any worse than that, really? I mean, I could try hard to sound worse than that, but essentially you don't sound like a very nice person, but actually you represent a deeply troubling thought kind of landscape within Russia and within the political landscape there, and it's thoroughly troubling. So if you're ever wondering what Russia are really intending, you don't have to look very hard, is my opinion.
No, it's very simple. And if you put the map up, Jonathan,
sorry, I was just
this region down here, once you get the map back up there, so the region basically in the red down there where your pink marker is, and so you're looking at Melitopol, you're looking at up to Oleshki, which is where your markers are by Robitny there. And then if you go to the right towards Mariupol and Rostov-on-Don, Russia.
Do you mean Orikhiv rather than Oleshki?
Yeah, sorry, Orikhiv.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Orikhiv. I'm trying to do it all from memory. If you go in that region right there, so historically, 1800s, it was given a name Novo Rosia.
Yeah.
That is a fact. However, and that translates New Russia, by the way, Novo Rosia, New Russia. That is not a territorial claim to the crown at that time in Russia. It was a geographical marker. Actually, It's been Ukrainian sovereign territory historically. We're back to about 750 to 800 AD, where there are actually indications of Ukrainian culture. For example, the trident. What you guys see as their marker, it's a trident. Um, there are representations of the trident all the way back to 657, 750. I actually did an entire stream on the trident, trying to show the world historically what's going on here and do not fall for the revision of history, as you called it, which is spot on.
Yeah, it's just there's a real problem with cherry picking history, and we see it in many different contexts. I mean, it first of all, the whole idea of there being this like perfect idea of what this perfect form of what Russia is depends a lot on. I mean, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but it depends on a movement or an idea called essentialism, where you've got Russia. There's this almost platonic perfect form of Russia, and it has these characteristics that are kind of that chiseled into stone, and you can't argue with it. And that Ukraine is part of Russia, and it's like, this is utter nonsense. The countries don't exist as objective facts. They exist as consensus agreements between people. And do you know what? The most important people to ask about what country they're in are the people who live in that geographical area. So, if they all identify as Ukrainian, and they have a Ukrainian language, and they have a Ukrainian culture, and the international community recognizes them as Ukrainian, then they are Ukrainian. It doesn't matter what you, Putin, say, and it doesn't matter what the Kremlin says. This is the right to self-determination that we like to afford people in a modern liberal society. But of course, that doesn't fit with the kind of imperialistic worldview that Putin and others have. So, yeah, just I have a real problem with that. And it also, sorry to go on, but it also depends, that kind of essentialist view depends on cutting off a point in time and saying, well, Ukraine doesn't exist because I'm looking at this little window of history where Ukraine didn't exist and it was part of Russia. Yeah, but what about before that? What about after that? You do realize that Russia started to exist at a point, right? So before that, you didn't exist as Russia. So do you know what? Even if Ukraine didn't ever exist until right now, if they want themselves to be Ukraine in that area, then they can be that, give or take legal ramifications and whatnot. But you don't get to dictate to other people who they are and how they feel. Anyway, sorry.
Well, no, there's two things I would say to that. First of all, the reason history is being revised, especially by Putler's new document there, which is 2021, I think you said, is because if you actually look at this historically, Kiev Rus, which we can take back to the 5th century, is way before Moscow. Moscow wasn't even on the planet, not until Prince Vladimir came up and all this stuff happened with Russian history. So we won't go into that right now. But the reality is it's established. The second thing you were talking about is, okay, if they have a language, they have a culture. So let's be honest. We try to share the truth here. There are cultural similarities. There are linguistic similarities. Now, Ukrainian is with the Cyrillic alphabet. Russian is with the Cyrillic alphabet. And there are a lot of similarities. However, there are a lot of differences. The Ukrainian language has some mixture with Polish. It's very interesting language. But I'm going to give you my experience now. This language thing is irrelevant.
Yeah.
The powers that be in the Kremlin know that the sovereign borders of 1991, including the Lugansk, the Donetsk, the Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea, are Ukraine. They will use anything they can to try to drive wedges into that to give them a footing for their special operation. But here's my personal experience. Nobody in Ukraine talked about the language until the Kremlin started talking about the language. I'm telling you the facts. I've worked there. I only speak Russian. I have zero problems speaking Russian. I try to speak a little Ukrainian, but I speak Russian. And when I'm on the front lines with the soldiers, I'm sorry to tell you guys, but a majority of them are speaking Russian, and they're because they can communicate together much easier in that native tongue, because the Ukrainian uh, being taught in schools has just started within the last decade. So yes, it's a cultural language. It is the national language. But if people think out there that just language and just culture is the issue here, they're clueless.
Yeah.
This is a dictator invading Ukraine to build a barrier against NATO and the West. And to tag onto that, he puts himself out there under the leadership of the Kirill, the archbishop, and they present this moral picture that we are the fighters of righteousness. And that's the picture painted, especially in Russia.
Of course, just taking a leaf out of Putin's book, you speak English, you live in a colonial part of the British Empire. So I'm afraid, the US is British. So we'll be able to help ourselves to all your riches, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. Well, we sorted this out. Anyway, nice speaking to you, Greg. Welcome to the British Empire.
Exactly.
No, so of course that's ridiculous, and that shows the ridiculousness of the Russian approach there. So you are well versed in how things are going at the moment and have been for the Ukrainians over time. What's your opinion been of the counteroffensive? And I know that it depends how you view it and whether you look at it. Well, for me anyway, I'm answering for you. But for me, it would be, well, if you're only going to look at it as territorial advance, which it probably originally was, then it's a bit of a disaster. But actually, straight away they realised that wasn't going to be the way to success, and they had to change tactics completely, and it became about a whole load of other things. That's how I've interpreted, as my viewers will know. How about you?
Okay, so very great question. Here's my view. Number one, the counteroffensive has not failed. It's not a failure. We are in a war of attrition. This is not a 6-day war. This is not a 3-month war. This war, unless something that we're not able to see right now is going to come on the horizon, is going to continue for a long time. And the reason it's going to continue a long time is because Kyiv, Zelensky, leadership there, military there, Ukrainian people, civilians are adamant, you're not getting our territory. Russia is adamant, not only are we getting your territory, but it's our territory because we have rewritten it in September of 22 as Russian territory, which is a joke. Okay. So this is the war. Now, technically speaking, I'm just going to tell you the truth. And it's told to me from my friends who are right now in Avdiivka, in Marinka, in Bakhmut, outside of Bakhmut. They're in the south. This is what's happening. A lot of people are dying on both sides. A lot of people are dying. But Ukraine has been able to hold the line unbelievably with the resources they have, the amount of soldiers that they have versus the amount that Russia has, the amount of munitions. Ukraine has done an amazing job. So up to this point, yes, would we have loved to be in Crimea? Of course. Who wouldn't? But Ukraine, I just believe if they can be supplied properly
Well,
and
this is
efficiently,
yes.
they have the ability to finish the job.
I mean, the issue is, of course, well, there are several issues. There's one, how deep are both sides' pockets, and this is where we can talk about Richard Barron's sort of views that he said in that Lucerne dialogue, that video that I showed my viewers, and you've also done got an edited version. But one thing to look at is who's got the deepest pockets, and whoever's got the deepest pockets will win the war. But Ukraine's pockets are a shared pocket of NATO, the EU allies, and Ukraine. And so on paper, Ukraine should win this war without too much of a problem, because the size of the economies of those nations vastly outstrip the size of Russia's economy. Okay, they might be able to pull a little bit on Iran, on North Korea, on China, but essentially that should be a win to Ukraine. But it depends on all these other entities pulling their weight. And then there is the personnel issue, where Ukraine has a country of 44 million, but how many are still there at the moment? How many can they draw on? Russia
Do
has...
you want to know how many are there?
Yep.
I can tell you. 28 million.
Really? So that is vastly lower than
28 million. And it's not my information. It is my Ukrainians who are connected to Kyiv. 28 million.
Which is obviously, even worse of a situation than it otherwise would have been, which would have been, say, 44 million.
Absolutely.
And then you're comparing that to what I don't know what Russia is, say 140 million, 140 million, but they've lost a few. But comparatively speaking, that's not going to be as a percentage as much. And so there, and in terms of stocks of equipment that Russia have been drawing on, Russia should win that. So that in order for Ukraine to overcome that, they have to have an attrition ratio, in my books, of somewhere like, I don't know, it's kind of pulling out my ass, but 4 to 5 to 1. And they have to have that all the time, and they kind of are having that. And so that's how they've been able to sustain the front lines where they are, and waiting to get asymmetries in certain areas where they get a competitive advantage. But the problem in this war is that when Ukraine get an advantage in one area, like a particular type of drone or what have you, then Russia will get that eventually. And sanctions are good up until a point when you get loopholes, and then they can make that at scale, and then we're back to the drawing board. So how do we get that competitive advantage to Ukraine? It is in terms of weapons, and it is in terms of the West helping. And whether you like it or not, America is going to be, the US will be the major component there, given the size of the Department of Defense.
It's simple, isn't it? I can tell you this. It's really convoluted. So right now, Ukraine is having a problem on the Polish border. We talk about that every day on my channel, updating people. It's a challenging situation that's a little strange, but we're working through it with facts as we can give them. So you may or may not know this. I'm sure you do, Jonathan. Germany came out and they're wanting to do some type of blockage on their German-Polish border to kind of relieve the pressure for Ukraine. So it's wonderful. Germany also sending in another Patriot system. Germany doing a great job supporting. However, I was sent a document last night that Germany's exports to Kyrgyzstan has exploded.
I showed that as well. Yeah. And it's not the first time. So earlier on in the war, there was another Kyrgyzstan graph, or it might be in Kazakhstan with Germany as well, which said exactly the same. So yeah.
So the supply is just changing hands. It's going to get to Moscow.
Yeah,
it will. So it's very complicated. So we're thankful. If you can give me this screen here, Jonathan, I'll show people
which one?
The purple one.
Yeah.
So guys, this is actually in Izvestia News, and right here it says Special Operacja Rosja na Ukraini, which means special operation of Russia in Ukraine. So they're not even calling it a war. This is a major news outlet of propaganda, which but people watch it like crazy, along with 24, along with Channel 1 and TASS. But this right here is interesting. This is what Russia is watching, the Kremlin's watching, and they're feeding this to their people. This says Billy Dome, White House. White House is facing a critical moment with the further financing of Ukraine. And the article goes in very good detail, talking about the United States now entering into a transition period where even a lot of the left are concerned about Joe Biden, a lot of the right concerned about their future. I'm neither right nor left. I'm for truth wherever I can find the truth, but very detailed, laid out description of what the United States is facing through December It looks like the first vote that's possible for further Ukrainian support is December the 4th. And most likely that one will be delayed as well. We're probably not going to get another package of aid out of the United States before January 2024. Probably. It's not a law, but probably. So this is right along with what we're seeing. It's right on their news. This is what they're watching. How
Yeah,
is the support holding up?
I mean, yeah, and just going to talk about Schultz actually. So this is an interesting thing that was said today, and I get, and this is complete speculation from myself. So Schultz, Germany have suddenly turned up, right? They've suddenly started dancing to the tune of the Ukrainian harmonica or something. You know, they are becoming, well. There's some analyses saying that they're now the biggest donor to Ukraine. I don't know if that's true, but either way, I mean, they're at least the second biggest donor. And I don't know if Schultz has had a bit of a realization. So he's come out today and said this is of existential importance to Europe. And that is really big rhetoric. Yes, he still talks about we're in for as long as it takes, which is a kind of bit wishy-washy to me. But to come out and say that actually this is an existential crisis for Europe is saying it's as serious as it really is. And I think Schultz has had that light bulb moment. And I think the Germans have had that light bulb moment where they properly realize the importance of the challenge to kind of liberal democratic ideals around the world. And I mean liberal in terms of, you know, not liberal conservative, but it's kind of to do with freedom and rule of law. And I just think that the Germany have turned up to the race and are now really taking the European lead, at least. And I think that's really important. I think there needs to be that recognition. And I was wondering if you had a similar thought to that, but also you just mentioned Mike Johnson. Well, you didn't mention him, but Mike Johnson as the speaker for the Republicans in the House of Representatives, which, as I've told my viewers, they rule on a 2-year basis. The senators, 100 senators, rule on a 6-year basis. So they generally, I think, will concern themselves with more international stuff. And the House of Representatives might concern themselves with local stuff to do with their constituents. But he suddenly changed his rhetoric a bit, Mike Johnson, and he's saying some things that are sounding a bit nicer towards Ukraine. And I said this morning, I wonder whether he's been briefed in his new position as speaker by intelligence entities and whatnot, and might realize actually how important it is in reality, and it's getting outside of his kind of local bubble. What are your thoughts on those kind of ideas?
So, great question there. So, Mike Johnson is actually, let's just look at him character-wise. He's actually a pretty good man, and he has pretty good views. Let me finish before somebody flips on me. Pretty good views.
That'll be me, mate.
Yeah, just wait a second. Pretty good views on some things here in the United States that we need adjustment on. His problem is he's a Trumper. And you're going to make me do this, Jonathan. Okay. I am not a Trumper. I am as anti-Trump as possible. I think he is a disaster for our world due to him being a narcissistic egomaniac. I'm going to leave that there. So at first, Johnson going to be completely against Ukraine, to be quite honest. But he started to get some information from reality. And yes, his tone is changing. So I'm thankful for that. I am concerned that politically here in the United States, as we continue day by day to get closer to our elections, and Ukraine is not in the news, but basically American elections are in the news. It's going to be a challenge for Ukraine.
I think that's a dead certainty, really. Either way, no matter what happens, Ukraine will be squeezed out, not least because Palestine is suddenly, you talked in the green room about the 7th of October being an absolute humdinger of a day. And Putin was laughing all the way to his palace that night, looking at the news. I mean, he couldn't have asked for anything better than what Hamas did. Talk to me a little bit about squeezing the news. How have you found that? What do some of your Ukrainian contacts think? Are they worried about Ukraine being sort of bumped down the ladder?
They're very worried. So you have two things that are happening here. Number one, you have what is portrayed in the media. You have Zelensky coming out, whom I support unequivocally, coming out and saying, listen, we know that the nations are with us. We know they're standing with us. We also understand that there's, as you call it, Jonathan, a hot mess down in Israel, and the world has to look at that as well. But we're confident that the nations are going to stand with us as well in our fight for Europe and for the world. So that's the company line. But in reality, they're nervous. They're very, very nervous, because if the supply stops or if it diminishes. In fact, last night on the stream, I was sharing something that came out of Kyiv, and here it is in a nutshell. Kyiv said, right now, we're thankful for the supply, but we have enough supply to hold the line, not to move the line. We can hold it. So I think that's where they're at. And if they're calculating a diminishing value in support coming, yeah, they're concerned. I promise you, they're concerned.
Yeah. I mean, it is naturally going to be an issue. What I hope is that even in nations, well, not even in nations like the US that are going to go through a tough election cycle, no doubt, where Ukraine may play center stage or might be seen too much of a political football, and therefore actually not play center stage and not be used by either side as a kind of bargaining chip. It may just be sidelined completely. I don't know where they'll go with that, but either way, Ukraine is going to suffer, I think. And when you look at next year being the year with the most elections, I think, in the history of the world, it's going to be a really challenging year. And when we see, I know I've talked a lot about on my channel the rise of the far right in Europe and how Putin has been stoking that. So I wrote a really quite a big article on that over the last few days, and how Putin is involved in, poking these hornet nests around Europe. We know that it's going to be difficult for Ukraine. What I hope is that you see populist politicians come and go, and you see governments come and go, but underneath that is often a civil service that is more consistent, and you have a Department of Defense or a Ministry of Defense that are career military people that aren't going to suddenly change their views on the geopolitical strategy or the military strategies that they've been working so hard to establish. And even if you were to get someone like, for example, Trump in charge of the US, that I hope the military and the civil service would hold enough sway to say, actually, either to change your mind or do things under the bonnet that allow Ukraine to keep getting the support it needs. That would be my last ditch hope.
Very well said. Agree with you completely. Think about this, Jonathan. You just stated that 2024 is going to be the largest year ever for elections in the history of the world. That in and of itself, in the world in which we now live, which has changed, would be enough to put the world in places it's never been before. Now, you put on top of that a horrible World War I/World War II like war, more like World War I, with the trench battles in Ukraine, Israel, Myanmar, China and the Uyghurs. You can go down to Asia and the destabilization. You can come to Africa and see the hands of, for example, Russia working throughout it. We're in a very destabilized world, and it's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, I mean, you had all those coups across what's the area called, the Salah area of Africa, where Niger was the last one. But it is a challenging world, and I think that kind of chaotic world, unfortunately, is almost like a vicious cycle. Like the more chaotic it becomes, the more confused people get, and the more confused people get, the more they grab onto a more extreme solution to that confusion. And actually, that's a kind of situation where people like Putin thrive, where they even purposefully sow confusion. The Russian propaganda, or Russian kind of FSB, information war, whatever it is, they will sow confusion and then present the solution to that confusion. And so it is, I think the next year will be super, super challenging. I mean, did you want to show your great, you're not Greg Terry.
Yeah,
you
I
are
think
Greg
it's
Terry.
a good time to show that, because this is speaking directly to what we were talking about.
The war in Ukraine.
So sorry, just to give.
No, you're good.
Just to give the preamble to this. So for those who don't know, this is Sir Richard Barrons, who's a former joint chief of staff, if you like. We don't call him that, for the armed forces in the UK. He's NATO involved, so he's a military man. He's given a half an hour talk to the Lucerne Dialogue, which is sort of politicians, businessmen, scientists, society people, movers and shakers around Europe. It's such a good half an hour. You absolutely have to go and watch the whole lot. This is a truncated version that Greg has edited together. I showed you some of this earlier today. That's my preamble. Did you want me to just play it through, mate?
Let her roll.
The war in Ukraine is a symptom of the strategic confrontation that now exists between us in the West and Russia. We didn't choose it, but we got it. And winning is as vital for everybody in this room as it is for the young man or woman who froze last night in a hole 3 meters under the ground in Ukraine. And why might that be? Well, that is because Russia decided to invade a democratic country on the fringes of the European Union against its wishes, to extinguish it as a state, to make it part of a return to a greater Russian imperial empire, and to do so knowing that we wouldn't be thrilled. It also is the same country that thinks it's fine to run some of the strongest organized crime gangs in the world at your businesses and your lives, including astonishing cyber capability, and to interfere in our elections. Now, if you're okay with that, I'm in the wrong room, but if you're okay with that, then the war in Ukraine is just about Ukraine. If you're not okay with that, then this war and its outcome matters to you. So let's circle back round. So the war in Ukraine is about your interests and your security. And let's come down to the issue of the day here, where you get to make a choice. And that is, right now, there are Ukrainian soldiers sitting in trenches, and they'll be there all winter, with not enough ammunition or equipment or training. There's nothing on their shelf. There's nothing left on our shelves. We've given all the stuff that we kept in store. The only way Ukraine wins is if we now mobilize our industry and our will behind that. And do not tell me it's unaffordable, because you represent an economy of 15 trillion euros a year, and I can feed the Ukrainian military on about 75 billion euros a year for 2 or 3 years, and I can make them win. This is not about affordability. This is about choice and competence. And isn't it a bargain if we can defeat Russia's objections to you on a war in Ukraine where you only spend money, you do not spend your children? Bargain of the century.
I love that last bit there. And it's so true. We are not sending our troops out. I mean, that was for a European audience. And when he says our cupboards are bare, that is broadly true in Europe, but actually is not at all true in the United States, because of the vast cupboards that the United States have. Now, I don't want to always be like, oh, the US can come and sort it out, but actually, in very real terms, the US is able is really very able to provide a shed load more stuff. I mean, I spoke to my tank commander friend. I've told my viewers this before, but it was like after Desert Storm, like we took all our 12 tanks or whatever, 20 to 30 tanks, whatever it was. We took all our tanks and our kit back. The Americans had so much kit that they ended up stripping some of it down and burying it. So they were like, it is not cost effective for us to take our stuff home. So they buried a load of the military equipment in the sand. Like the British, if we even buried like 5 bits of kit, we'd be like, well, that's half the cupboard gone. So like when you look at the Wikipedia entries for like how many bits of kit the Americans have, it's like 6,000 Bradleys, it's like 6,000 Abrams tanks. It's like they have so much, but of course, if they were to overwhelmingly give to Ukraine and other countries don't, then it would look like a proxy American war far more. So I think they're in a difficult place where they need to give, and they probably want to give a lot, but they don't want it to be escalatory. I don't know. I've done a lot of talking. What do you?
No, you're spot on. You know, that concept is what the world is missing, in my opinion. Especially, you know, you're there in the UK. To be quite honest, it's not that far from the UK to the border there, and to be in Ukraine. Over here in the United States, a lot of folks, to be quite honest, do not even know where Ukraine is. They're learning and they've done better. So it's like we're on this side of the world, and that's that side of the world, and that is a concept of a lot of Americans. But let me just tell you, his words were right. I have personally lost many, many friends in this war. I don't know if you guys can remember when the war started, or this phase of the war rather, and Russia was invading from the north, and they came down through Irpin, Bucha, and Gostomel. There was a famous picture of a young man laying in the street dead on his bicycle. Very famous picture. I knew that guy personally. I know Ukraine's got millions of people. I knew that guy personally through a connection in Kyiv, and it rocked my world. And now that we've been supporting and helping, this is, I think, Jonathan, and it's what we try to do in English. You're there in UK, and you have a global audience. I'm in the US. We're on different time zones. We're trying to keep the message out, but people do not get the horror of this war. The absolute horror.
I would take that in a different direction, and I would say all of that and all of the above times 10. So like the war crimes that have been committed, and 110,000 registered war crimes or whatever it is now, just a phenomenal, mind-boggling number of horrific incidents that have taken place. But I would appeal to people's more selfish nature. So in the US, it's like, yeah, you might morally agree that this is terrible, but you won't want to spend your hard-earned tax dollars or whatever on sorting out that problem. Yeah, it's horrible, but you guys go and sort that stuff out. So it's about, how does this affect you? So what I liked about Richard Barron's there, and actually if you watch the whole thing, he talks about this a lot more, which is all the ways that these kind of conflicts can affect. But at the beginning of the video that you did there, you had the idea of epistemic security. So in philosophy, epistemology is a study of knowledge and truth. So epistemic security is this new kind of idea where we've had national security, we've had cyber security, now we've got epistemic security, which is a fight over truth and knowledge. And as he mentioned, Russia are getting involved in elections. They are messing. He even talks about getting inside your head in later on in the talk. He's like, if you've got a mobile phone, Russia can get inside your head and they can mess with your, this is so. For Americans or any other people around the world, your lives can be affected by the information that's coming out, and then all the economic impacts of Russia doing well, and China, and so on and so forth. Sorry,
let me just add to that to bring more validity to your point, which is spot on. When we were first running the front lines, so I've done, I call them tours. I've done 2 tours, a 2-month and a 3-month, where we're on the front helping. I'm leaving in a month for my 3rd one. and I'll be streaming from there right from the front, guys. We were in Kramatorsk, okay? Very famous city over there. It's a large city. It has very large industry. We were literally in Kramatorsk, probably at that point 40 kilometers from the front line. It's much closer now, but 40 kilometers. And we had been into Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut dropping aid, and we came back and we were staying in Kramatorsk. And we were staying at a friend's apartment, and they had Wi-Fi. Yeah, so Kramatorsk is right there.
So you've got Bakhmut in that. Bakhmut's there.
Bakhmut's right there, right there.
And you've got this
right there,
semicircle of Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk.
If you leave that map, what we do, we're in Kramatorsk. We work. I call this on my streams the loop road. So the loop road includes Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Drushkivka, down to Konstantinivka. You turn left, you go to Chasiv Yar, and then you go into Ivanivsky, and then you're in to Bakhmut. So in this area right here, we were dropping aid there, nighttime, complete blackout. Then we're staying in Kramatorsk because it's a little safer. And we were at a friend's house, and literally, Jonathan, we connected to their Wi-Fi, which was a Ukrainian carrier. And I was logging in, and my partner was logging in, and we were instantly relocated to Russian connections. I'm just telling you, we filmed it. We could not even connect to the internet because of security, and it was a Russian attack on the internet that day there in those cities. Completely blocked us. From that moment on, we started using Starlink. We travel with a Starlink. We do what we want to do now. But it was a complete attack. Secondly, I was sharing with you in the green room prior, you're talking about this mess, the search for truth, and how Russia has been in trying their or spinning their web of deception. When I was in, many of you guys do not know, I'm new to you, but I was in Washington, D.C. I was invited there about 3 months ago, well, September, and I was invited to the Ukrainian embassy and to the Capitol Hill, meeting with U.S. senators, U.S. House reps, the ambassador to Ukraine, Colonel Tuchinov, a very high-ranking Ukrainian military guy, deputies from the Ukrainian parliament, all there meeting. And I was invited because I'm very close friends with a deputy out of Odessa and friends with Reznikov at that time, who's now moved on. So I was invited. We're telling the truth, sharing in English, and they know that I spend a lot of time in Ukraine. So that's how I got my invite. All that to say this: Victoria Sparks, House member from Indianapolis, sat down with just 30 of us and said, listen to me. And I filmed her. I put it on my channel. She said, you have full permission, Greg, no problem. She goes, I will tell you right now that Russian propaganda is assisting in writing bills that come across our desks, that come on the floor to be voted on in the Capitol building. There's no doubt in my mind.
That is so absolutely.
It's there. Yeah, that's Victoria.
I've got goosebumps. I'm not even bloody American, but if you've got someone saying that there are bills that have the fingerprints of Russia on them that are hitting the floor in Congress, then that is a huge worry for those who are interested in free and fair democracy. Which it really is.
You know, so my partner, I'll get him on here. We'll schedule that, Jonathan, whatever be convenient for you. His father was a major in the Soviet Red Army for propaganda, and that was his responsibility. He was way up the food chain. The power of the propaganda, even back in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, was at such a level that the world didn't even recognize it. But you add on top of that exactly what Sir Richard was talking about with cybersecurity, with election meddling, and with the use of technology. They have a leg up. They just have a leg up. And that is what we're trying to eliminate as well by sharing truth.
And so I've said many times before that we can't win the information war without Ukraine prevailing in this war. So the Ukraine prevailing on the battlefield is the foundation for us sorting out the Russia meddling in, for example, European elections. I mean, meddling in European elections they have meddled in US elections. I don't care what some people want to deny. And as I keep saying, meddling is not collusion. Let's keep collusion out of this. Let's not go down that route. There's lots of debate to have about that. And the Mueller report didn't conclude as many people think it did. Actually, it was rather open about collusion. But let's leave that. We're talking about meddling, and all the major platforms and social media companies have admitted that Russia meddled in the 2016-2020 elections. They meddled in the UK Brexit elections. I'm not saying that they changed the results, right? Or they would have, without that meddling, the results would have been different. But they meddled, right? And they have meddled in a whole host of elections. In fact, that article I wrote about the rise of the far right in UK, I list all of the example, well, not all of them, some of the examples of the far right rising, and then how that is evidenced with given how that has got Russian fingerprints all over it, right? And so there is so much evidence that Russia have and are meddling in elections. And the US has just brought out, White House just brought out a statement about Latin America last week about Russia meddling in Latin America now in the information wars. This is such a worry to us all. And if we don't allow Ukraine, or we don't help, or we don't facilitate Ukraine winning on a battlefield, we will not be able to win in the information space.
Sir Richard said it perfectly. This is the bargain of the century. This is the bargain of the century, because we're not understanding that if this is not won in Ukraine, it's going to be on our doorstep. So it's, you know, I know it's hard for people to comprehend that Russian propaganda or Russian meddling, as we're using that phrase, which I agree with, can really happen. Not only can it really happen, so I travel a lot. Last 13 weeks, I've been all over the United States, and I'm a public speaker. I do a lot of different events where I speak to large groups, and you and I stay in tight, buddy.
Yeah.
And hey, we're good. But Jonathan, this is shocking. I have people whom I know and have known for 25 years come up to me and say, or ask, Greg, like, I really believe you and I love you. I've known you for 25 years and I know you do all that work in Ukraine, but on this one, you're wrong.
They're say in a great position of knowledge. It's like you're the one that's gone to Ukraine and understand it's better than them by orders of magnitude. And they're like, I think you're wrong on this because I've been watching Fox News, and
that's exactly right.
Wrong.
No. Let's call it the way it is. I've been watching Tucker Carlson.
Yes, yeah.
That's what I've been watching. A traitor who now has his own channel in Russia, by the way.
I know you've been skirting around interesting. I didn't know that. I know you've been skirting around the issue. I mean, you're involved. Are you a pastor? Are you involved in? You have religious congregations,
Jonathan.
Right?
I am an enigma. So a pastor, yeah. A minister, yeah. A motivational speaker, yeah. A musician, yeah. A patriot for the United States and a patriot for Ukraine, yeah. I don't want to label it. I'm a truth hunter.
Yeah, I'm a truth hunter. And I love this.
Yes, I'm a preacher.
Yeah. So what I found interesting is that doesn't surprise me at all, because what you are is someone in this really awesome situation where, if we're going to be simplistic labeling, you can imagine you're speaking to quite often, I assume, and I could be wrong. Maybe you've got loads of liberal people in your congregations, but I don't know what kind of congregation you have, but the automatic go-to place is religious conservatism in America that is very much along those Tucker Carlson lines. I could really see this idea that you are talking about Ukraine to these people, and it's like the cognitive dissonance in their minds must be like, right, this is my pastor. I really, really dig him. Like he's in a position of authority, but I've been told all this stuff from these other information sources, and here's someone who's actually been there. And yet,
Jonathan,
what's really interesting is they don't go to you, the person that's been there. They go to them, the people on TV.
brother, I'm just going to tell you the truth. They're so lost. And yes, a majority of it is the conservative Christian right. They are lost into this well of, and I mean a water well, into a well that there's no way that they're wrong on this because they are indoctrinated. I do not consider myself a religious right nut job. I am looking for truth. Now, I have beliefs that truth is found in scripture. That's my belief. Okay. But I'm not out chasing lunacy and ignoring reality. The reality is people are being slaughtered in Ukraine, and the world, and I'm referring now to my country, Americans, Christian right, 50% is my number of them are anti-Ukraine, and that's a tragedy. A lot of money, man, a lot of money.
Mate, we could have so many talks about so many things. Just brilliant, and thank you for doing this. I'm really enjoying it. Interestingly, if you carry on, and I'm sorry to have brought that up. I didn't want to like go
No,
down
it's
the whole,
fine.
but you know, this is reaching across the aisle. You know, I'm an atheist philosopher.
This is beautiful.
Christian pastor, and we can talk because we have commonality here, which is actually a moral commonality. It's a kind of like however you do your morality and however I do my morality, we're coming to the same conclusion, which I think is super important. But yeah, if you can just talk about something for a couple of seconds, I'm just going to find an article.
No problem. Well, first of all, Jonathan, here's what I will say to your last statement, and that is this. Isn't it beautiful that we can agree on so much that's so important? That's what's beautiful. Now, with that said, yes, I travel a lot around the world. I work in 38 nations, to be quite honest. And the last 12 weeks, I've been in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York, PA, Ohio, San Francisco, PA, Carson City, Nevada, PA, Los Angeles, Reno, PA, Virginia, PA, Pennsylvania. That's been my last 3 months. So I'm out with a lot of people, a lot of different backgrounds, not all. And I want to be fair, Jonathan. The number's 50%. It's my number. I think it's very accurate that 50% of the church, that right.
Yeah.
I don't want to call them pro-Russia, but they're definitely middle of the road to anti-Ukraine.
Yeah. And that's the power of disinformation or misinformation. You know, it really, yeah. And this is a kind of challenge that Richard Barron's is talking about. I just want to go to, and I'm sorry to have mentioned several of my articles. It's only because generally I write articles on everything that's in my head. So, and that's all the things we ever talk about. So I've written like 5,000 articles or something like that over my time. So there is that. If we ever have a conversation, I'm down the pub with my mates, right? And we'll be having some discussion. I'm like, I've written an article on that. I've written an article on that.
When I'm there, I'll go to the pub with you, my friend.
Let's do it, buddy. Let's do it. But this article is, and I'd be interested. Obviously, you haven't read it, but I did a bit of investigation into this and the link between Tucker Carlson, the Heritage Foundation, and Russia, and the money going from Russia through to Viktor Orban and through a couple of different organizations in Hungary, and then going then to Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson's father is on the board of a lobbying company that lobbies for Viktor Orban, right? So, like, all you need to do is follow the money here. I mean, I just dismiss what Tucker Carlson says, because I know that he's just saying it on account of who's lining his pockets. This is nothing other than that. But it is so insidious, this, and the connections, and you can see it going through Serbia. You can see it, you know, when he went and met the Serbian president, and it's just it is just follow the money. Look at the Heritage Foundation. Again, their position on Ukraine changed over time. Again, follow the money. It's just, it really, really disheartening to see this kind of activity. Anyway, that's enough of me ranting about that.
Well, I completely agree with you 100%. Follow the money. And it's very interesting. You know, I try, my guys, you know, where I stream, I try to never tell anything that I can't prove.
Yeah.
And there's no conjecture. One of my pet statements is, we're going to wait and see, but this is what it's looking like, but we're going to wait and see, especially with this war. But one thing we do not have to wait and see on, and that is this. You're right. Follow the money. You can follow the Kremlin. You can follow Lukashenko. You can follow Orban. You can follow, I'm sorry, but Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Because at the CPAC meetings, you do realize just a couple of years ago that Viktor Orban was one of the keynote speakers.
Well, they were two CPAC meetings have been in Budapest, right?
Well, one was in Texas, where Orban came.
Just like, why are you going to Hungary, to Budapest? And what I write about that in the article, because actually, if you want to go to conservative right-leaning country, you could go to Poland and get the same kind of thing, but they'd be completely different. The only reason you go to Hungary is because of that connection of money through to Russia, and it is again it's in that article as well. I've linked them in the live chat, but yeah, so
it's all connected, man. You're right.
Yeah. It is such a worrying thing. Okay, to move the conversation to kind of military matters, and you've talked about how you've already talked about how you are concerned about Ukraine's lot going forward. You're concerned about, I mean, we could talk about Europe needing to get on a war footing themselves to react to Russia getting on a war footing and putting themselves in an economically more viable place so that they can produce more stuff, because it's all about, Justin Bronk had a brilliant interview with Ward Carroll where he talked about how if you strip it down to its barest like calculus, it is how if artillery is responsible for killing 80% of troops on the front line, then producing artillery and procuring artillery enables you to keep attriting the troops. And if Ukraine can't get their hands on artillery, then they are unable to attrit the Russian troops at the correct level, which means they will be able to then train their troops better. They're not just feeding them directly into, after 2 weeks after mobilization, into the meat grinder. They are able to reconstitute. They'll be able to just generate a much more viable force. Therefore, it's all about being able to react to Russia getting on the war footing by putting ourselves on a war footing and procuring, manufacturing enough ammunition. And that's just the start. I mean, it's not to talk about airplanes. It's not to talk about, tanks and missiles and all this. It's just mortar and artillery shells and bombs and shells. So there is that. But outside of that, if you could wave a magic wand, if you could get, and maybe it is artillery shells, like what piece of equipment, if you could have endless amounts of it, would you get to Ukraine? I know it's
easy. It's easy. Artillery shells.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to break the news for everybody, but I'm going to. F-16s are not going to win the war for Ukraine. They will help, but they will not win the war for Ukraine. So, but we're thankful getting those guys trained and get them in the air over there. No question. Artillery. So last night or 2 nights ago, my partner was dropping some drone range extenders to some of our friends and guys there, the Zaporizhia front. And they were so thankful because, and we got the interview of this, and he says, listen, this just allows us to back up and to control our drones at distance so that artillery guys can hit the right targets, and it keeps our guys alive. The artillery, and I've been there, it's unbelievable the amount of artillery that is flying towards Ukraine and Ukraine responding. You know, you remember early in the war, everything we were talking about HIMARS. And no, at first it was the 777s. We're talking about the 777s.
Yeah.
And then it was the HIMARS. And they've been awesome. And Patriot systems, they're great, but there's 4. We're going to be 4 in that huge nation. It's artillery.
Artillery.
I can tell you this also, Jonathan. I will tell you this. Fact, my own eyeballs have seen it. I was down in the Bakhmut area. It was actually in Chasiv Yar. I can tell it now, it was months ago, in Chasiv Yar. And our guys were firing, and I say our guys, Ukrainians, were firing 155 millimeter shells made in Pakistan, and 3 out of 5 would fail. That was some of the supply that they were having to use at that point. They were Pakistani 155 shells. And that's a fact, guys. A fact. I watched it with my eyes. They said it's better than nothing, but it's terrible ammunition. So the second point there is, yes, Russia is already on a war economy. Sanctions, although will affect a little bit, it's going to do nothing for the war. Russia is a massive nation full of resources. And it's so interesting to me that people look at the sanctions and they just believe, oh, this is great. Europe sanctioning, US sanctioning. Hello, friends. They do a lot of business with China and Africa and India and Asia, you know, South America, Central America. There's 0 sanctions. There's going to be a workaround. And Russia, it accelerated them moving to a war economy, doubling factories, working 24 hours, converting factories. It's already been done. New drone factory being built in Belarus, new drone factory out in the Perm area. They're happening all the time. And the world is just sending money, but we need to prepare ourselves on a front.
You could do a flow chart here where how do you get down to providing Ukraine with X or Y? And it goes up to this kind of Schultz potential, and it's my speculation, but this moment of like a realization of existential threat, right, for the politicians. But along with that, you need a communication of that, a correct communication of that to the public, so that there's this kind of circle of supporting the politicians at the ballot box, so on and so forth. So you've got this solid public support and political support for then getting on a war footing and getting on a war footing. But then you need to realize that both the public and the politicians need to realize that getting on a war footing isn't necessarily bad if you can economically set it up in your own best interest. So this is what, and actually, was it Richard Barron's that talked about this? Or no, it was Justin Bronk again. But I've been talking about this heaps, which is like, when the US give a bunch of equipment to Ukraine, it's not a charitable act. A lot of people might think it's kind of born out of morality, but it's actually born out of geopolitical strategic needs, right? The US are going, right, what do we need to do in order to maintain the US at the top of the hegemony, right? At the top of the strata of power in the world, right? If we want to maintain our position as number 1 in the world, we need to do X, Y, and Z, right? And part of that is going to be not allowing Russia to usurp our throne, right? So we need to keep Russia down, and this is a fight going on in Ukraine, but we're not committing our troops. We can commit a load of stuff to them, so we can give stuff that's obsolete and old, and we can replace it with new stuff for ourselves, which means we're upgrading our own equipment, but at the same time we're producing that in the United States. So we're producing jobs, that we're getting tax revenues in, and we're advertising all our equipment out there. That then HIMARS has now got a queue to buy HIMARS as long as you're armed. So then that gives money back into the US. So all of this builds into the economic strategy of the US over decades, which is put in the Department of Defense. I mean, gee whiz, it's like $1 trillion budget or whatever, almost. It's like, But you've created a country whereby the DoD is, like it or not, the industrial military complex is at the center of your economy. And so therefore, doing things like this isn't about charity, and it's communicating this to the American public. It's saying all of this is to the benefit of you. This is money into the US, but it's also money into the US by us being at the top of the geostrategic ladder, so on and so forth, energy security, etc., 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 etc. Rant over, your turn.
Well, I'm just going to just partner here with you because you're spot on. And this is where, okay, you were dropping some very technical philosophical language about 20 minutes ago on the study for truth.
Epistemology.
Thank you. Looking for the truth. So the truth is this: until the United States and until the world can understand what Sir Richard Barons was saying, this is going to be the vicious cycle of misinformation that we're fighting. Because you're right. There's nothing better for the United States, for Great Britain, for European nations than to support Ukraine out the wazoo and win this war. There's nothing better, and it will help our nations. It will save Ukraine. It will build a barrier against Putin and hopefully stand for things that are morally right. It's so simple. It's so simple.
It's great that those things are aligned. It's not just all these things. It's also, you got the morality on your side. But actually, when you're trying to sell it to the US public, the morality bit, sadly, plays as it would to any public. I'm not saying the US, but only thinking of it's not as bipartisan as it is in the UK. In the UK, if Labour get in next, which they probably will in 2024, so the Conservatives are almost certainly going to lose, it will not change anything in Ukraine. However, if the Republicans were to get in the US, that could have significant effect. So that's why I'm talking about American
politics. It will have significant effect.
Yeah.
I try not to project, but it will have significant effect. Secondly, okay, I'm an American. You're a Brit. Okay. I'm just going to tell you the truth, and everybody watching, about my own country. There's a lot of Americans that just don't care.
Yeah.
They just do not care. It's over there. It's not in my world, and I live in America. I'm sorry, and I try to fight against that, but there is a surprising amount of Americans that think that way.
But it's not surprising, because actually, do you know what? It is a long way away, and you have your own problems, your own like, I'm working a 70-hour week. I'm not bringing home enough money. Prices are going up. Energy prices are going, well, that is actually connected, but you know, let's just forget that one. It's like, I live in this bubble of my life. We all do, and luckily all of us have like found each other on the internet, and we're able to hopefully have a more accurate understanding of how the world is working. But it's very easy to sit in your bubble of not knowing about, and therefore not caring about, things that happen on the other side of the world. Thanks so much to Starty Bartfast, who says, John's right, I live a short way from the US Army's Pennsylvania production plant. So PA is a site of one of the big artillery shell manufacturers there. And the expansion to make those shells is an economic godsend for this area. Because things like that are not just about the money to that company to make that, but then you're employing another 200 people, and they all have to buy sandwiches at lunch. So you got a sandwich shop that's delivering
trickle down economic. It touches everything.
Well, yeah. This is actually, I'm not a fan of trickle down, but this
is.
But
I'm not referring to the theory of trickle down. I'm just saying,
but yeah,
trickle down.
You're right.
It touches everybody.
Genuine trickle down economics, where you've got. But in terms of just the middle class or the working class getting jobs, and as we know, the working class will spend money much more easily than those in the elites. You know, that money will be spanked locally, and that then is a money multiplier, and the local economy does really well. And that is what will happen. And Justin Bronk talks about how these manufacturing, these shell manufacturing, or the military equipment manufacturing plants are in very poor areas generally. I don't know whether that's a strategic decision to build them there. So these are potentially, I mean, I'm not one to try and justify the military industrial complex doing really well. I mean, goodness me, 5 years ago I never would have said anything like that. But if you're trying to sell why we should defend Ukraine, or why we should assist Ukraine, sorry, then it's appealing to people's kind of selfish natures is actually probably going to do better than appealing to people's moral natures. It's kind of all I'm saying. Sadly, that's humanity.
It's really surprising that people can't get this and nations can't get this. I mean, I personally attribute it to Russia having the leg up on the media and the propaganda. I really do. I'm a firm believer in that. I think we're trying to catch up. Ukraine's trying to catch up Europe and the West, but they've been doing it for a long time. However, how the world cannot see that this war in Ukraine is so key to global stability. And if we allow it to fail, we haven't experienced anything yet of destabilization that we will see in the future. As Richard Barron said, I keep repeating it. This is the bargain of the century. Let's finish it right there.
It's an interesting comment here from Richard Bennett, who says, my late father said Americans didn't care about the war in Vietnam. They would flip TV channels rather than watch the news. It's interesting, the parallels to this and the Vietnam War, although it's a Vietnam War time set. So this is, I guess, a 21st century manifestation of the Cold War. The Russian Federation is the Soviet Union. The US is still there. We got NATO. This is Vietnam 2.0, except it's way more than that, because since then the world has become, and someone said this earlier in a live chat, the world has become a lot smaller since World War I, World War II, since Vietnam. The world has become smaller because we are so much more interconnected. So when this war breaks out in Ukraine and you have an effect on the supply of hydrocarbons, everyone's affected. When the Vietnam War happened, no one was really affected in the world. When now we've talked about the information war, where we are being affected at the ballot box in our minds by what Russia is doing. We are being affected in the cost of everything, because everything it depends on energy to make it. And if energy costs are affected, then everything, the price of everything is affected. So, this stuff affects us because we are so interrelated and the world is so much smaller. So this is Vietnam 2.0, but it's way more than that. And yet still people will be turning over the TV because people live in their own lives and have their own issues, and they don't see the importance of this, sadly.
Well, I'm just going to interject here, Jonathan, to tag on to that. But that is where the world, in my opinion, is missing these people that had the ability to transcend cultures, to transcend languages, and to rally the troops. And I don't want to get into the politics of it or people's thoughts, but if you go back to World War II and you had a Winston Churchill with those rallying calls, and you have different leaders that were able to share truth in a way that would rally people to get invested, interested, and care, I really believe that would change the view in Ukraine and the world's response to it. That is why I'm concerned that if Donald Trump goes into office, it's going to have a negative effect on Ukraine, because I remind you, he's the man that has told the world that he can stop the war in 24 hours.
I love the fact that Zelensky actually challenged
Zelensky
him on that.
invited him.
Come over and tell me how you're going to do it. Because that sounds really cool. Like, if you can solve it in 24 hours, I'm game. Like, let's do it. Let's get on.
We need that.
Absolutely. Okie dokie. Do you know what? I agree with you. And I've actually, I've been doing this, goodness knows how long now, off and on since the beginning of the war in different formats. I was writing about it more than I was YouTubing. Now I'm a full-time YouTuber. But actually, the last couple of days, okie dokie, I am with you. Like, the war in Ukraine is a monster knocking on the door. I've actually had a bit of a moment where instead of getting war fatigue, I've got war, oh shit, this thing's real. Like, in the last couple of days, it's just, I've kind of woken up to, it's even more serious than I thought. And I think I've probably woken up to it because I've come to a realization that Russia are actually sorting themselves out properly to do this for the long haul. And you know, once you recognize then they're getting on the war footing, there's this extra level of realization that actually this is an even bigger challenge than I thought it was a week ago. Is that fair?
Are you kidding? I am going to reply to one of your people there, Hubert. Sir, I respect you. God bless you. But I'm telling you right now, it will be a problem for Ukraine and the rest of the world if he's elected. And if you can look at that picture back there in that plate, Hubert, that's Ronald Reagan. Sorry, but that's my hero. Okay, that's the era I grew up in. That's a lot of my viewpoints. So, yes, Jonathan, it's really bad. In fact, you know what? This may be a good place. I've got that one last clip there.
Yep.
So let me set this one up.
Oh, by the way, just to add, can I just add to what you're saying?
Please
if
do.
anyone hasn't seen it on Amazon, on Prime Video, if you haven't seen the documentary Active Measures, it is absolutely phenomenal, and it is so information packed. So it's about the connections between the Trump administration and Russia. And I know lots of people will be like, "Oh no, it is an absolute must of a watch." It blew my mind when I watched it when it came out. It's the sort of thing you've got to watch twice because there's that much information. And when I've had arguments about the connections between that US administration and Russia, I've said, look, go and watch that and answer all of those things. And even if only 50% of that is true, I mean, it's so amazingly well documented. Even if only 50% is true, that is terminal, right? But anyway, that's Active Measures, but that wasn't what you wanted to show. This is what you wanted to show.
This is my partner in Ukraine.
Zaporizhia.
So, your view of the war, this is the war last night.
This is last night, was it?
Yeah.
Запоріжжя, далі. Оце наш готель. Non-stop. Non-stop.
These are all separate clips over 6 hours.
Okay, it's again non-stop. Non-stop, Запоріжжя. Non-stop. О, дивись. Варус.
That's our vehicle actually being repaired.
So are these guys now oblivious to that? Do they hear it so often that it doesn't affect them?
Okay, so you can pop it out. It keeps going nonstop. So no, look, maybe you've been last couple of weeks paying attention to this, where Yuri Ignat, he is the spokesperson for the Air Force of Ukraine. And President Zelensky had put out a message saying, is it possible we can find a way to minimize the air alarms? Meaning, can we get a little better technology? Because when the MiG-31's going the air, we have to put on a full alarm because they're carrying the Kindles or the daggers, and we really can't stop them effectively. And they can reach anywhere in our nation quickly because they're hypersonic. So can we reduce that? Is there something that we can do to stop wearing our people out? For every 24 hours that Ukrainians are under air alarm, every 24 hours, it's $250 million hit to the Ukrainian economy.
Yeah.
$250 million every
Wow.
24 hours of air alarm combined. So Zelensky's asking, is there anything we can do?
Yeah.
So Ria UK came out after they met with the Air Force, all their guys. He says, sorry, Mr. President, it's too dangerous. We can't tell. They're refueling the MiGs and just running our border just to keep us in terror. Now, I've been under those air alarms.
Just to cost them, though. It's like literally you can let's just keep running these MiGs for 24 hours and we'll cost them $250 million.
That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. And Vladimir Putin a month ago said it. He says, I'm going to start keeping the MiGs in the air, and they're going to do it all winter. Now, you asked a question, and I can answer it, I think, fairly accurately. Are people growing weary of it? So, yes, they were. And that's important word there, were. Pre-Kindles being fired regularly. Now, there is much more concerted effort for Ukrainians to get to safety. At the early parts of the war, the air alarms go off, everybody runs to the bunkers, under the buildings, in the metros, in the large cities, into safe places. Mid-war, it kind of was, all right, we're used to this. The chance of us getting hit is slim to none. And then places like Kramatorsk got hit, 50 killed. The cafe hit outside in that Kramatorsk region as well, 53 killed. And at that point, people once again started to take it seriously. So now businesses are having to close again. They had stopped that. If the air alarm goes off, they have to close the doors and nobody's allowed in. They've got to get to a safe place. They had stopped that. Now they've reinstituted that. So it is a challenge at the minimum. And the other thing is sleep, weariness. Those air alarms are so loud. Unless you are a deaf human being, it is, not would be. I live in them when I'm there. It is very difficult to sleep and rest if they're going off.
Can I go through a couple of super chats? Is that right?
Absolutely.
So, King Raccoon, thank you so much, and thank you for being the catalyst here. Evening, nice to see live stream. I hope it's good. Well, I think it has been really, hopefully, informative and interesting for the viewers. I know that I have got a lot out of it, and I hope that we can do this again. Best wishes, guys. And Mark Biscu, by the way, I'm doing a live stream with Mark, who's based in Canada, Mark and Olena, who are kind of Ukrainian Canadians. I put that on the thumbnail, Mark. I hope that's okay to call you a Ukrainian Canadian. I don't know if that's the right labeling for you. But anyway, Greg is a great guest. He's spot on with his analysis. It must be remembered that during the time Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, our language was not allowed to be spoken. Olena's father only spoke and taught her Ukrainian in the house. Interesting. And again, that goes to talks to an oppressive regime. Any kind of regime that says things like that does not have freedom and liberty, at the heart of what they're aiming for. But thanks, Mark, and thanks so much for the super chat. That's really, really generous, as you always are. Is there anything you wanted to say to that, Greg?
Well, that's called a firsthand witness, and I can just tell you it's factual. That's why early in our update, our stream tonight, your night, my afternoon, I was very clear. Don't fall for the traps that it's about language and even about culture. This is about right and wrong. This is about evil and good. This is about a safe and secure future, not only for Ukraine, but for the world.
Mm.
And it's way beyond what most people are expecting. And it's nice to hear when you have, you know, eyewitnesses. And, you know, I'm going to get my partner, the guy you just saw there, Zhenya, his name is Yevgeny Matsutsa. We'll get him in here, and you'll
Do it.
enjoy talking with him. His English is great. But when you can get a firsthand witness, I'm telling you right now, it's less than 10 years that schools even began to do classes in Ukrainian. It was in Russian up until a decade ago. And then it was slow to transition. You may have half of your classes in Russian, a couple in Ukrainian, and one in English.
It's I like to look at it as in this kind of way, as far as working out who the good guys and bad guys are. Like, unless you are full on rose tinted glasses kind of wearer looking at the Soviet Union and thinking that somehow the Soviet Union is the way we should organize the world, and if that's your worldview, I'm not going to convince you that Russia are the bad guys here. So whatever. But if that's not your worldview, then would you rather a world in which you've got a free and self-determined Ukraine? Does Ukraine represent a better ideal of what the world is, or does Russia represent a better version of what the world is? And if Russia were to take over Ukraine and do to Ukraine what it wants to do, is that really? I mean, anyone who's seriously, I just can't understand anyone that supports that kind of ideal. And the only I remember when I had someone, I banned him from my channel now, but I had this guy, and he was a black guy from America, and he kept commenting, and whenever someone announces their identity in their first comment, it is very often that they are a Russian troll. If they say something like, "Oh man, as a white guy from as a white single dad from Pennsylvania, like blah blah blah," and yeah, hang on, I wasn't talking about any of those things, and you brought that into it. It's a real common troll characteristic, where they announce themselves in the terms of a bunch of identities to try and get people who identify with those labels to go, "Oh, that's cool, I'm those things as well," and then they go blah 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 blah, and then wedge themselves into the conversation and say, "Oh, by the way, Putin's really cool," type thing, right? And that's one of the, anyway, he appeared to be doing that. And then I called him out and said, I don't think you're a black American person who used to vote for Biden and now doesn't. Like, this seems like troll language. Like, I think you're a Russian troll. Anyway, he sent me to his channel and videos of him saying, and he was this black American guy saying that. And then I was like, oh, I'm really sorry about that. But that makes it worse. Like, that makes it a whole level worse. Like, you have not done yourself a favor here. Yeah, you made me look like I'm wrong, and I'm wrong, right? Potentially, and we can talk about that in a second. But if you're no longer a troll, where you're being paid to do this,
it's even worse.
It's even worse, because you are morally aligning yourself with a narcissistic, megalomaniacal dictator. You're a moral monster. Anyway, that was my.
But yeah, I had a good attack Wednesday night.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, I was attacked for sure by Russian trolls. And the reason I know it is because I couldn't even stream on Friday of last weekend, because I couldn't even, my YouTube was completely ransacked on the back end. And I know you know the back end, on completely ransacked, everything messed up. I actually had to get YouTube to fix it, and it took them hours. And they said, what on earth is this? I said, this is what happened. They go, well, you were hacked. Everything you have is changed. Everything. And had to go through, rebuild all the channel. And we did it in a few hours, got it all done. But they were coming in and they were ripping their trash. And I've got good moderators. And one of them's watching in on your channel tonight, JDO. He jumped in there and took care of them. And that was one of my opportunities to just let it rip in Russian. And I let him have it in Russian while moderators were getting it taken care of. But it was 100% genuine.
Yeah, and it's quite, like, I often talk about how I'm on the battlefront. I don't want to devalue the real battlefront for the Ukrainians, but I'm on the battlefront and you're on the battlefront
Mhm.
in terms of the information war, because this is a hybrid war where there is, Russia are piling resources into fighting this war in other dimensions other than on the fields of Zaporizhia. And, we have experience of trolls, we have experience of people trying to do things to our channels, so on and so forth. And, it's just the nature of the beast. So, yeah. To continue with the super chats, thank you to Paddy Pliner for gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. What a legend. And King Raccoon did then say, Greg, I knew you two would be amazing and hit the middle ground. Amazing worlds apart, but united.
Yes, sir.
So thanks, my man. Lawrence has gifted 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships, as he often does. He's such a nice guy. AJ Simon, fascinating live stream tonight. Keep spreading the message, Greg. If you ever get down an English pub with JP, I hope he gets you a few beers out of this. Yes, okay, mate. The beers are on me. It's not a problem. Not a problem. But thanks, AJ. Really appreciate that, mate. And Knut Inge Skifelt, which is my best Norwegian. Thank you very much for the super sticker. Really appreciate that, mate.
Well, that was pretty good.
Well, yes, but was it?
I don't know.
But yeah. I can live with that being pretty good. So just as we kind of, I guess, wrap this up, move to meander ourselves towards the end. There's so much we haven't talked about. Obviously, this is a vast topic that spreads its tendrils into so many different areas of geopolitical life. But what do you think's either topical or worthy of note, or something you want to broach?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, because your insight and your reach and your touch and your care for Ukraine, for me, it's very personal. 26 years of my life there. And so, like, I'm deeply appreciative of you and your care for disseminating the truth and helping the world understand, especially in English. It's vital. As far as the war, I can tell you this, time will tell. I'm so pumped to get back over there just right after Christmas. And, Jonathan, for sure, we'll be able to connect when I'm there. And that would
really
be
cool.
super cool. And you can show your guys reality of the front. In fact, one of my favorite places to stream from is field hospital in the Bakhmut area, with the chief surgeon there who's operating on the soldiers. I'm completely actually going to the operating room with them, and
Wow.
he speaks perfect English. It's incredible. So we will we'll definitely connect on that. But more than anything, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity and the ability to come on and share and build a friendship and meet your community. I hope they've enjoyed. I just love Ukraine, man. I just love Ukraine, and I know they're not Nazis, and they're my peeps. And I'm going to stand with them. Here's what I'll tell you, Jonathan. If the roles were reversed and what is happening in Ukraine was happening in the United States some way, Canada, Mexico, whatever. I'm just hypothetical here. I know my Ukrainian friends would be here. Period. Therefore, I cannot turn my back on them. Secondly, I'll give you a personal story to close out. In 2008, I took my entire family to Ukraine. And yes, that's 15 years ago. And my daughters were older, but my son was 6 months old. He was an infant. And I took my whole family to Ukraine for about 6 weeks. We just was there in the summer. And my son at 6 months old became extremely ill, very sick. And actually, my partner, Zhenya Yevgen Matsutsa, says, Greg, I've got a nurse that'll take care of your son. And her name was Svetlana. She's probably about 35 years old. And she was I guess we would be like a nurse practitioner. I don't know what you guys had there in
Yep.
UK, but
Yep.
okay. So nurse
Sounds
practitioner.
pretty good.
This lady dropped her job, came to my apartment, and took care of my son and nursed him back to health for about 10 days straight. Like, he was ill. And there I was in Ukraine. And nothing I could do really, you know, being in 08. It was still a little slow on the medical side. Well, fast forward to 2022. She's still a nurse, but now she's a medic on the front lines saving soldiers. So do you know where the first place I decided to give support and brought tourniquets and med supplies and everything they needed? I took it right to Svetlana. She called my partner, says, we have no real tourniquets. Please, can you and Greg do something? That was my first spot, because I didn't forget what she did for my son. I will do for her. So, and that's the way they are, period.
It's funny. The Pierre Dupont, who works for a charity, is one of my viewers, and he and the charity, the guy that actually started the charity, a guy called Anton, the Ukrainian. It's called Base.ua. It's a charity that does kind of similar sorts of things, get stuff to, well, actually does a lot of work in evacuating people, and there's psychological work around that and getting people out, and as well as a whole bunch of other things. But he keeps saying to me, mate, you need to come over. You need to come over. And I've got progressive multiple sclerosis. My mobility is bad. I, you know, things like I need to be very close to, you know, going to the toilet quite often. Things like that, like the bladder being affected by MS, like things like this mean that actually just upping sticks and going to Ukraine for me is actually quite a challenge. I have to be able to organize my health and all that kind of stuff, as well as like it's a war zone, and how does that work with like coming back alive, and then you know, my family and having a couple of children. One's quite a challenging child, and you know, leaving my partner, and that's, but I would absolutely love to go to Ukraine. It's just like trying to find out how and when to do that. But when I
let me put this out here. You're invited. So UK to Ukraine is not that far away. And I will be there. Let me just tell you, if you want to come for a week or 10 days, you're invited. My guys will take care of you.
This is something I really now need to. I'm getting fewer and fewer excuses to give out to people as to why I can't go there.
Well, for all of Jonathan's viewers, he now has an invitation. He has a relative guarantee of security. He has a place for lodging, and he will be taken care of. There you go, buddy.
Greg. Dagnammit. You put me in a corner.
You brought it up.
No, nobody puts baby in a corner or something. Right. But so, Greg, look, there's so much more to talk about, but I think that's a great excuse to do this again, if you don't mind. And if we can co-stream, then that's brilliant. Like happy days and all this. So let's sort that out. But you know, we can do that at our leisure.
Yes.
Can I just say thank you so much to the wonderful live chat that's been going on. Really lovely words to Greg for those of my viewership, saying like wonderful stuff to Greg, great guests and all that kind of stuff. Really appreciate your support, everyone. Thank you so much to the super chatters, I guess, and I'll just go through them again. King Raccoon, thanks twice. Mark Bizq, who's a legend in his own underwear. Paddy Pliner, as we say. Paddy Pliner, Lawrence 22, really appreciate that. AJ Simo, and just because I want to say it again, Knut Inge Schultz, something. Anyway, Knut, thanks. And I'm going to give my final words to Greg in terms of, you know, what do you have to say about the conflict, about any kind of wise words for the general viewership?
Well, my wise words would be this: we may not, and I see some of the chat, you know, we do not have to agree on everything to agree on some things. And I just want to encourage everyone out here, keep the main thing right now, which is, as Sir Richard Barron said, the bargain of the century: focused on Ukraine, focused on helping Ukraine. And you may ask, okay, well, I'm watching on a TV here in my house in Toronto, Canada. How can I help? Share, tell the truth, write a letter, do anything, because it's really grassroots efforts that are making the difference in this war. And if we all do our part, we can see the world change. So thank you, guys. Do not grow weary in well-doing. It'll reap a good harvest.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you,
and I
Jonathan.
just reiterate all of that. Thanks to Jack Ray for the memberships as well. Look, guys, thanks again. Take care of yourselves. Please check out all the videos I'll be releasing tomorrow. But more importantly, check out Greg Terry Experience on YouTube, and that channel at 3.95 thousand subscribers, sorry, deserves to be 10 times that size and then some. So please go and subscribe to Greg's channel. Do you know what I haven't done yet? And there I've gone and done it. So, you know, it's that easy, guys. Go and do it. Please, please.
Yeah.
Stay on the line, Greg. In the meantime,
will.
everyone, speak to you tomorrow. Toodle pips. Big love to the team.
Good night, guys.